Rare is the wine that spends more time in a barrel. Rare are the vineyards that flourish in a more harsh and unforgiving land. Rare is the grape that is harvested by hand and crushed by foot. The wine is port, and this is Ports to Remember. A discovery of port wine from the grapes to the glass. Come, savor the wine. Harvest the grapes. Get to know the place and the people whose lives have been wrapped in the joy of port wine for generations. Join your host, wine writer and connoisseur Tony Aspler in this celebration of Ports to Remember.
Well, treading the grapes to make port is perhaps the most romantic aspect of making this wine. Join me in a minute because I'm going to get in there too. Near the top of the Portuguese coast, not far from the border with Spain, lie the two cities that form the commercial hub of the entire country. Porto, called Oporto by the British, and directly across the Douro River, Vila Nova de Gaia, the center of business for the port wine trade. We're here in Vila Nova de Gaia at the lodge of Ramos Pinto, and down there you can see the bust of the founder, Adriano Ramos Pinto, and I'll be going upstairs to see some of the other treasures in this wonderful lodge, so join me, please. George.
Hello, Tony. Nice to see you again. Welcome to Ramos Pinto.
Thank you. This is George Rosas, who's the fourth generation of the Ramos Pinto family, and he's going to show me around the lodge. Now, a lodge isn't just a place for barrels, is it? It's a working office.
Yeah, that's right. Well, actually, we are now in our head offices, and this house was built in 1708, and my great-grandfather bought it and restored it in 1909. So let me show you around.
Oh, wow. She's beautiful, but I don't think she'd fit in my living room. Wow. Tell me about these tiles.
Well, these tiles are typical Portuguese azulejos.
The tiles are a traditional decoration called azulejos. The word azul means blue. These particular works were part of a vast program commissioned by Adriano Ramos Pinto. The mythological themes and classical style perhaps allowed polite society to gaze on such suggestive scenes. The taste of Adriano Ramos Pinto is also clearly reflected in his company's advertising posters. Some of these ads were quite proper, courtly, or Edwardian. Others, however, took biblical themes and added a definitive risque note, such as the fall of Adam and Eve, not with an apple, but with a glass of port. The posters were part of a well-planned marketing and advertising campaign that was very sophisticated and innovative for its time, and it was also very effective.
Tony, this poster for me is one of the most beautiful posters from Ramos Pinto. It was designed by the famous Italian artist Cappiello in 1926.
Well, we've seen a lot of posters and pictures of port, but how about the real thing? How about a glass of port?
Yeah, let's have a glass of port.
George and I are sitting where Adriano Ramos Pinto himself entertained his business associates. The room is like an Englishman's club. Ornate carvings, oak panels, with Bacchus, the god of wine, to keep a benevolent eye on things.
Grapes.
Now, we do have one of your products here, so maybe we should try it.
Yes, this is the 20-year-old Tony, and aged in oak casks. And when I mean 20 years, it doesn't mean that the wine has exactly 20 years. It's a blend from different wines. And here we have wines with less than 20 years, but also wines with, for instance, we have small quantities here of a wine from 1880 to give this complexity of aromas and this long finish.
Oh, cheers.
Cheers.
Now, this is the 20-year-old Tawny, and we'll see actually where this is made and how it is made at Ramos Pinto's lodge. A less ornate but most important room in the lodge is the blending room. Presiding over all is a photo of the man who blended the 20-year-old Tawny port we sampled. It's George's father, José Ramos Pinto Rosas, master blender for decades. Today's master blender is his nephew, João Nicolau de Almeida.
It's a blend.
Yes. Now, you're very well known for your blends, especially your old Tawnies. Tell me about your 20-year-old.
20 years old is a blend.
A 20-year-old Tawny port is more than a wine that began 20 years ago. It may include a portion of port that is 100 years old or more. The 20 years means the average age of the wines in the blend is no less than 20 years. João Nicolau uses wonderful imagery to describe the blending process. These wines are samples from each of the barrels in the cellar. He says that they are notes of a piano, and with these notes he composes a taste, perhaps a fugue, perhaps a symphony, but always a masterpiece. João Nicolau de Almeida took me to the cellars in the lower level of the lodge to show me where the composition begins. In this dark and quiet, the port wine is guided towards its finish many years in the future. Perhaps that's why all the master blenders I meet work so long for the same company. The wines become their children, and the masters, naturally, want to know how they turn out. The wine does not simply rest in the barrels to maturity. It's coaxed towards the desired end week by week. João Nicolau and his confrères taste the wine in every single barrel each week, so they know how the wine is changing as it matures. They rack the wine regularly to clean it of its sediments, taking it out of one barrel and putting it into another. Even the individual barrels themselves make a difference to the taste.
Wine in the barrel, we have to taste the barrel.
How do you taste the barrel?
Well, we put all the barrels along this corridor, empty, and then there was a man who is coming with a hammer. It hits the barrel, and I taste. I put my nose in the barrel, and then I choose. I put one cross or two cross, depends of the type, the quality of the.
George Rosas joins us again with an interesting implement, a glass pipette that takes wine directly from the barrel. It's called a wine thief. And what do port producers do after a hard day's tasting? Simple. They go out to enjoy the fruits of their labor, and maybe to check out a competitor's product. Hi, I'm in a wine bar in Oporto where a lot of port producers come to drink their wine, because here at Divino you can try 30 different ports by the glass. And with me is George Rosas and his lovely wife Francisca from Ramos Pinto, and I've always wanted to ask this question: what does a port producer drink when he's off duty?
Well, usually personally I drink a glass of white port, dry white port, but I also drink sometimes slightly chilled old tawny, like a 10 or a 20-year-old tawny during the summer.
Well, that sounds like a good idea.
Well, would you like one, Tony?
Excellent. Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers. Stay with me. When Ports to Remember returns, we'll take a train ride into some of the most beautifully rugged countryside I have ever seen. Porto is a thriving city. It's been wealthy since the 1500s when Vasco da Gama and other explorers brought back spices and gold from India and South America. Walking through these streets, I find the modern vigor sharply contrasts with the myriad monuments and the ornate style of architecture. Much of the Baroque design is the creation of the Italian architect Niccolo Nazzoni in the early 18th century. The blue azulejos tiles are everywhere. These, in the vast entrance to the train station, portray modern life in Portugal, at least as modern as it was when they were painted in 1930. Well, it's 7 o'clock in the morning, and I'm on the first train up the Douro Valley. It'll take 3 hours to get to where the port grapes grow. My destination is the vineyards. The demarcated port wine region is approximately 100 kilometers from Porto, following the Douro River. The train makes 3 or 4 trips a day. This time of year, it's not very busy. The ride is hypnotic. The river doesn't seem to be moving. Deep in the valley, we're shaded from the sun, except for the occasional flash as we move through the mountains. This is a trip back to another time. The tracks were laid more than 100 years ago. It took 12 years to dig 50 tunnels and build 60 bridges. And when the first engines rumbled up these tracks in 1887, travel to the Douro was no longer a rough ride upriver. People could travel in comfort with refreshment close at hand. I wonder if the early travelers were served port instead of water. Our first stop is Regua, where the Rio Corgo flows into the Douro. It's over 2 hours from Porto, about halfway to the Spanish border, and it's a wonderful home base for a tour of the Douro Valley. At Regua, the vineyards begin. From here on up the river, the views of this magnificent valley become patterned with the sinuous curves of the terraces and vines that are the beginnings of port wine. My stop is Pinhão. As one writer puts it, crossing the iron bridge to Pinhão is a symbolic way of saying you're entering the best vineyard area of the Douro. I pass a market, red-tiled roofs, and a view of the river with the Douro boat that recalls the shape of the Barco Rebelo that once carried the wine to Porto. The town of Pinhão is the nearest stop to my destination, Quinta do Bom Retiro. Here too, the ubiquitous azulejos. These paintings are a complete visual depiction of the production of port. They're part of the timelessness of this valley. These paintings could have happened 100 years ago, or just yesterday. The ox cart is still a very efficient way to carry a load from town back to the farm. And that's life in the Douro. Here in the Ramos Pinto vineyards, as it is throughout the Douro region, the harvest has hardly changed. Although it's hard work from sunrise to sunset, it's a very social time. The women delve into the green vines to find the deep blue grapes, just as their grandmothers taught them. Now look at that rich color. The men shoulder 30-kilogram loads on a simple yoke, just as I'm sure their great-grandfathers did. This woman says she first came to the vineyards at the age of 10, when her mother and father harvested the grapes. Her mother showed her how, and she herself has now helped with the harvest for 50 years. She hopes to have good health for many more harvests, because she loves it. It's easier for the men, this other woman says, They used to have to carry the grapes from here all the way back to the quinta. But now they only have to go back and forth to the tractor. While many things have not changed, new methods and technology have reached the Douro. In fact, Ramos Pinto was the first to use modern technology in vinification. Today, roughly 80% of Ramos Pinto grapes are mechanically processed. The grapes are dumped into the crusher that removes the stems and presses the grapes in one operation. From here, the juice and skins are pumped into temperature-controlled stainless steel tanks for fermentation. The juice and skins are circulated in the tanks to get as much of the rich color from the grape skins as possible. Once the fermentation has produced a level of alcohol of 7%, grape spirit, or brandy, is added to stop the fermentation. Some sugar remains, which is why port is sweet. This is the modern way of vinification, but it's not the only way. Bom Retiro does have one lagar remaining. This is the traditional way of crushing the grapes. The first stage is a march. It begins late in the day when it's cool and the day's harvest is done. Grapes with the most promise are pressed in the lagar. The foot is actually the best tool for the process because it presses the grape, releases juice and color, but doesn't break the seeds or stems. That way, the amount of tannin released is just right. No one translated the comments they made in Portuguese about my shorts. Well, I like them.
Well, if you want to know what it's like to tread grapes, it's rather like wading through cold porridge, which is sticky and also scratchy because of all the stems and the pits. And my hands are sticky, but I loved it.
After the march, they'll dance in the grapes or play games. This one is like blind man's bluff, and they play it with vigor. Boy, did my hand hurt. The treading continued till midnight, but I was ready for bed long before that. Morning in the Douro. The beauty of these surroundings and the feeling you get is hard to describe. You feel raised above the land, closer to heaven. If ever you have the chance to visit these hills, take it. Many quintas here are like bed and breakfasts, but the place itself is like nowhere else on earth. Surrounded by such stunning beauty, such easy peace and quiet, I feel like I've been somehow moved to another time. Imagine waking to this vista every morning. The Rio Torto falls over the rocks below on its way to the Douro River. The tortuous twists of the terraces are graceful from a distance, but I can't help but think about the effort that must have gone into their construction. They call these the Vineyards of Hercules for a very good reason. But bathed in this golden morning light, they are beautiful. In any light, Quinta de Bom Retiro lives up to its name as a fine retreat. It's an honor to be a guest here. The building is nearly 300 years old and remains as solid as the land around it. And without so much as a whisper of the train or automobiles, this is a good retreat indeed. The rooms are light and airy and very comfortable. Bom Retiro was decorated when Paris was the mecca of fashion and style. And you can still see the Parisian influence here. But it is a working farm. Bom Retiro is rarely open except for the harvest. My host, João Nicolau de Almeida, took me out for a closer look at the vineyards.
Splits like that.
Okay, and these grapes here are Touriga Nacional, right?
Yes, Touriga Nacional is one of the best 5 varieties that were selected by José Ramos Pinto, José Rosa Ramos Pinto and myself in 76. From 80 different varieties we select these 5.
And these are now used throughout the Douro Valley as the 5 best grapes for making port.
Yes, which are Touriga Nacional, Tinto Cao, Barroca, Roriz, Touriga Francesa.
João Nicolau and George Rosas' father, José Antonio Ramos Pinto Rosas, isolated these 5 grapes. Today they make up most of the port vineyards in the Douro Valley. Ramos Pinto is a pioneer in viticulture. It was here, for instance, that patamares, terraces without stone walls, and vertical planting were developed. These systems permit greater access for tractors and other machinery. Today, the techniques are used in the new vineyards throughout the Douro region. Back at the lagar, the grapes I helped press the night before were being stirred to extract more color from the floating cap of grape skins. The tool they're using is called a macaco. It means monkey. Nobody could tell me why exactly they were called macacos, but the design has not changed for generations. Back at home, the aroma emanating from the kitchen was a wonderful welcome. Cod is the Portuguese national dish. Here the cooked fillets are placed in a casserole with mashed potatoes and a bechamel sauce, and then baked in the oven. Simple, hearty, and delicious food. And with all this fresh air, just what I need. Stay with me. Ports to Remember will be right back. Ruby Port. If you buy a bottle yourself or you're given one, you can keep it for up to a year before you open it. But once you open it, make sure that you consume it within a month or 2, and that way you can maintain the freshness and fruitiness of the port. You've been watching Ports to Remember. Join me for the next program in the series.